I'm Sarah, and this is Custodians. I would like to acknowledge that this podcast was recorded on Awabakal country and the country of the Wurundjeri people of the Kulin Nation. I would also like to acknowledge that this content has been recorded at a time when the human species is having an unprecedented impact on the planet, at a time when coronavirus has just disrupted all of our lives, and at a time where the veil of racism has been laid bare since the murder of George Floyd. I would also like to acknowledge the 432 Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders that have been killed in police custody since the Royal Commission in 1991. This interview is with Tyson Yunkaporta from Sandtalk. Okay, so much for joining us today, Tyson. It's an absolute pleasure to have you. I have to say, I picked up Sandtalk and 3 pages in, I already knew that it was going to be my favourite book and that it was probably going to trigger me a lot at the same time. So thank you so much for writing it. I'd love to hear a little bit about Sandtalk and your inspiration for Sandtalk and a little bit about the contents without being too much of a spoiler for the people who haven't read it yet.
Right. All 3 pages in, I knew I was in trouble. It was I've just written at a really difficult and busy time in my life when I didn't really have time to write a book, and maybe that's the best time to do it. I didn't know anyone was going to read it. Like I thought maybe a couple of thousand people, and I probably would have done it really differently if I'd known that all these people were going to read it. So it's probably a good thing that I didn't.
That's really good advice for people wanting to write a book, I guess, in terms of...
Well, people are like, oh, you're really brave, some of the things you've said. And I'm like, yeah, well, I didn't know anyone was going to read it. If I did, I wouldn't have said half the stuff, So, I was really, really dancing like no one was watching because I thought no one was.
Mm-hmm. And that's sometimes when we do our best dance moves, right?
That's it.
So underneath Sandtalk it says Indigenous thinking can save the world. Can you tell me a little bit about your reflections around that?
That's I think that's just marketing. And I have no idea about marketing, and I'm not remotely interested in branding. And I had nothing to do with the title of the book. But I'm absolutely fascinated with the genius of it. Just absolute genius. So I didn't call it Sandtalk. I called it, I can't even remember what I called it now, but it was something that I thought was clever, but it was just like inaccessible. Which is like clever but inaccessible is like most of my work. It's just genius because they've looked at a market, they've looked at where the market was going, what people were worried about, what people are terrified about, how terrified people like to buy things to make them feel better, especially when they're looking for answers. And I think it's a genius bit of marketing from a really sexy small publishers who, have an idea about what's going to sell in a particular niche at a particular moment in history. And this is a very particular moment in history. I'm sure you'll agree. I think if you're looking for whoever engineered COVID-19, it was probably my publishers. They probably got a lab out back or something.
I think that's really curious because what I'm kind of noticing in the world is that we're potentially moving beyond this polarity around left and right, right and wrong, and I absolutely acknowledge what you say around, I guess, the more marketing business side of birthing these things into the world, and I think that it actually makes me feel with joy that there's been this harmonization between both worlds to be able to get these stories that are included inside this book out there, because I could actually feel it kind of rewiring me as I was reading it, and I definitely wish it was something that was included in my curriculum at school.
It's funny about with politics. It's not about it's not about politics anymore. Left and right isn't about politics. It's about branding.
Mm-hmm.
It's about your consumer brand, and and the people who are the product, the politicians or the musicians or whatever you want to get, like everything culturally is a brand now. You know how in some languages every word is either masculine or feminine?
Mm-hmm.
Like most of the Latin-based languages.
Mm-hmm.
It's kind of like now everything in the universe is divided culturally and metaphysically into left and right. And some of them just don't fit. It's so weird, for a lot of the things that I used to look to the left for, I'm looking to the libertarian right, the fringe. Like I mentioned, that there's a fella called Jim Rickards,
mm-hmm.
Who does some interesting stuff with complexity theory and economics. Culturally, just complete libertarian.
I think that's something that's really curious, is like, how do we actually learn to have conversations with people who we've once thought were completely different to us and then we might not have so much in common with, but how do we hold that space and be curious and listen out of curiosity and not out of judgment?
Yeah. And I just think, basically, Sand Talk is a book about narcissism and how to defeat it, not just in other people, but in yourself, and in fact, not in other people at all. That's the thing, because people are going to do what they're going to do. You need to be able to talk to anybody and find something of value that you can build on.
I did notice that you used the word narcissism a few times in the book, and I thought that was quite curious, in that, our education paradigm, and when I say our, I'm basically talking about the last maybe 50 to 100 years perhaps, but it was very much grounded in, the Industrial Revolution and the types of jobs that we're going to be having, and what they tend to call the fixed mindset. And so we were operating from very much a place of, or taught to operate from a place of ego and what. And so what will you be when you grow up, and things like those kinds of questions to be asking little kids, and that what then holding on to the narrative of that holding our value. And that's something that I think has resulted in, I guess, that narcissism being completely dialed up. Do you have any thoughts on the education system and narcissism?
Oh my goodness. It's weird. Making people into individual narcissists, it sort of gives them a false sense of empowerment.
Mm-hmm.
So what you've got is a whole society, entire society that's not really a society. It's just this fragmented cluster of nodes. So it's not even a system, because there really is nothing going on between those things. So you've basically just got a whole heap of just fragments. But each fragment, so each person is running around feeling empowered and feeling connected, So narcissism, that narcissism really serves, systems of power and, individuals who place themselves in positions of power over systems, and who destroy those systems in order to gain. I don't know what they're after, because what do they think that the material wealth means once the system's finished?
Mm-hmm. I think it must be a curious time to be a billionaire right now, because you can't really, what we're seeing anyway is that you can't necessarily buy your way out of, not getting coronavirus. You can lock yourself in a house and things like that, but it must be really hard to have all of this money and go, well, we're looking at COVID-19, we're looking at climate change, and have we gone too far, and is all this money and wealth I've accumulated even enough to save my life, let alone the lives of people?
Yeah. So you've got that. You've got I don't have the same opinion of billionaires as everyone else. I think they're sacrificial lambs that have been thrown out to distract us, to give us someone to hate, because we're all looking around to going, all right, where the hell is this power? Because we need to find out where it is and rip it out before it kills us all. And so we all go, these billionaires, there's more billionaires now. They're there's heaps of them, and but you need to look up exactly what the numbers of billionaires were, in the 70s, 80s, 90s, and follow through, and you'll find that they're an endangered species. Billionaires are decreasing all the time. In the last decade, billionaires have been dropping like flies. There aren't many of them left, and they're not the ones who have all the money. So you look at all the money that billionaires have, and then look at the total money in the world, wealth that is owned, and particularly owned concentrated wealth. And you'll find that those billionaires that we're looking at only have a fraction of that. So you're like, well, where's the rest of it? Now, this sounds like a conspiracy theory, but it's not. There's you must know about asset management funds.
Yes.
Yeah. Trillions, quadrillions, quintillions. These are if you're Bill Gates, like you walk into the asset management fund and ask for an appointment, and then you sit and wait for a few hours, and then you go into the office and you take off your hat and you say, can I get $1 billion of my dollars out, please? Like, who are those guys? So it's BlackRock and, those ones, Vanguard. There's a bunch of them, and, it's just a big aggregate sort of a thing. So, I think we're constantly being misdirected. We're constantly being thrown villains, like lower order, middle management villains. Like people start going, where are all these children disappearing to? Jesus Christ! What? He was on that play. What's going on here? What? Rolf Harris now? Bill Cosby now? So they go, oh, holy shit. And they throw us Jeffrey Epstein and go, look, there's a billionaire who, he was doing all the bad things. Nothing to see here. They're sacrificing like these little, these middle management people. And I'm sure they're doing, back in the day in Rome, in ancient Rome, because everything's from Rome, there'd be somebody who'd be selected as a scapegoat, someone higher level, and they'd just be sent a note from the emperor or the Senate, like, bros, fall on your sword, or take a nice bath and open your veins. You're going to get blamed. But if you take your own life, if you kill yourself now, we'll make sure that your family inherits all of your wealth. And we won't confiscate that. The state won't confiscate it. So that's been a practice in civilization for quite a while. The Romans invented that one. It was a pretty good one, because then you could always get, middle management of the powerful to do, whatever.
I'd love to try and weave in a few themes here. And I'm going to try my best to ask this question in an articulate way, but we're speaking about reductionism and nodes and systems.
Yeah.
And the economy and narrative, and I guess ancestral trauma. And so that's a lot of things. But, you touch on it in your book around Plato and reductionism and how we've been taught to look at the world in all of these different parts. And so how do we come back to a more interconnected fabric of an ecology? And I don't just necessarily mean humanity here. And how do we start to sort of, I guess, take all these lessons and these things that we might view as problems, but if you reframe them as lessons, and how do we start to write a more irresistible and beautiful narrative for what is possible here on this planet, do you think?
Well, I think we need to understand what trauma is. When you understand what trauma is, then you take control of your narrative. Like, and not just you. See, it's funny, in English, that sounds like I'm just talking to you. But, so in Aboriginal languages, as I've say in the book, there's lots of different yous. So there's you as in you two, you and your sister, or whatever. And then there's you all, like you big mob of you, et cetera, et cetera. You belonging to them, you belonging to her. There's all these different yous. So anyway, I'm talking to all of those yous. But you can take control of meaning making, which is your purpose as a custodial species. Meaning making is important. the meaning that you make, that you co-create, because you're not inventing it. You're co-creating it within a pattern of creation. You're living and being the pattern of creation, and you're making meaning, and your story, it's going into the aggregate of all the stories. And the aggregate of all those stories together makes the truth. Now, trauma is your failure to make meaning of something.
Whew, that's a truth bomb.
Yeah, because was that traumatic? That wasn't the trauma. Like, even in medicine, they call that a head trauma, what I just did to myself. But, my understanding of it, your understanding of it, and the meaning we make around that now, that's if I fail to, come to grips with that, if I fail to place that within a context of relations, and I fail to make meaning and learn around that, what I needed to learn, that's the trauma. The trauma happens in the space in between.
Do you think that we don't understand trauma because we're, I'm sure, I'm going to make an assumption that you were probably told don't cry like a girl when you were younger and things like that, and so it's infused into our narrative that feeling sad or crying is wrong, and so we actually don't have the space for, and I hope I'm not using this phrase incorrectly, but for sort of the sorry business and for that healing. Yeah,
the grief, and I guess that it's why you cry. You're having a mini moment of grief. Yeah, I cry a lot as a man. As a child, I didn't, because you'd get bashed for that, and you couldn't cry. Like in Queensland schools, because I went to schools in sort of remote places, in construction camps. So where they're building the frontier bloody infrastructure, like dams and mines and things like that. And these were schools where you didn't wear shoes. These were schools where I got the cane every day, and you learned, to take your medicine. And if you cried, then it was, the sexuality was a thing. So it was, faggot, pufta, everything. There is that horrendous thing there. And then there's, I don't know, but you need to have that moment where you just, you need to release the emotion of whatever's happened to you. And that emotion, it's a mediated thing anyway. It's your failure to understand what's just happened to you and to express that confusion, that grief, that loss, because you haven't made meaning yet. You haven't come to terms with it. But then there's a period of time. So if someone dies, it's about a year, and you need that period of time. You need to make meaning, and you need to structure that meaning and make it happen. Because then there's no trauma then. It's not a trauma. The things that happen are part of your life. I didn't make meaning. So when I was a kid, there was a thing called polling, and that was so, the other kids would get you, and there'd be 3 on each leg, and they put your legs either side of a pole, and then they'd all pull and try and basically pulverize your testicles. And that would happen. And, so you had to get good at that and how to shift yourself just before the moment of impact so that you weren't crippled for life and maimed. And, the first few times you were, and, you have ongoing medical issues throughout your life from the various things like that used to happen in the 70s in these settler places in the lowest, dreg parts of society. But yeah, that, when you're 15 minutes later, you're eating a meat pie and having a laugh. When you're a kid, and the tears, like, as long as you release that, that confusion, and as long as you revisit it later, and as long as you're dealing with it and making meaning around that, and then figuring out, all right, so what am I learning from this? What am I getting from this? How am I changing myself? How am I adapting myself? This is my context. This is my habitat. As an organism, how am I mutating in response to that? You know, and you know, not in response to, because you can't be all bitter and twisted and go, fine, these people are bullies, you know, so I'm just gonna fucking you know, if you go like that and you get all bitter and twisted, it's not a good mutation, is it?
No.
You know, you need to find your ecological niche in the shifting landscape of wherever you are and whatever's going on, and you need to be able to do that. And you need to use all your relations, and your relations, that means the non-human entities around you in your landscape. You know, these things, you connect with these things and they teach you things. You get messages from birds, but you get actual physical help too from your non-human relatives. You know, viruses, they come into you and they mutate your DNA. They facilitate evolutionary changes physiologically in you, but then also spiritually and intellectually. You know, you curl up in a ball for 2 days and you have a bunch of fever dreams and you come out and you feel like a newborn baby because you've changed. That's why you get sick in that way. And that's only with the viruses that, you know, when things are out of balance and and in a state of flux, like pathology sort of illness. But most viruses, you go for a swim in the ocean, you always feel better, eh?
Yeah.
Because there's these little viruses, and they're phytoviruses, like the little green, like they're little plant sort of viruses. And they go into you and they change you and they help you and they facilitate all kinds of healing. And, you know, most viruses are good medicine. They only become bad medicine when things are, so if you're destroying an environment and there's a whole heap of, you know, organisms fleeing that burning environment, trying to figure out where they're going to, you know, go to next, and they're rapidly mutating in response to crazy circumstances, then, you know, their little microscopic helpers will respond in crazy ways to try and help them become fit for a crazy, impossible environment. You know.
That's so curious. I never thought about that in the context of cultural burning, and I guess our previous context before what we saw with COVID was the horrific summer fires here in Australia, and there was also fires all around the world. And just prior to that, I was actually in a site called Yarramundi, and we were doing some cultural burning with the Parks and Wildlife Services and rural bushfires, and they were talking about how the smoking of the trees was actually part of their healing as well. And I'd never realised that, because, you know, being like having a smoking ceremony for a person, it's a real cleansing, and the importance of doing that for the trees as well. But then you know, bringing that back to the viral sense, if we are kind of coming through it and, you know, allowing, not that we allowed per se, but we potentially facilitated by not caring for country enough, these huge bushfires, and that causes these genetic mutations to then create a whole heap of danger, because, you know, there's not too many things that you can guarantee in life. But one thing that I'm holding on to at the moment, when I think about the destruction and climate change and all of these things that are happening, is that life wants to live. And so what will continue to happen for life to live? And that doesn't necessarily mean the human species.
It's just whether or not you want to continue to participate in that. If you'd like us to be part of the story. And here's the thing though, and this is, you know, from an Aboriginal point of view, you know, we are the custodial species. You know, we have a really important role in creation, and we're supposed to be here. And it could be that role would have to pass to somebody else, you know, like the echidnas, who, you know, have a larger neocortex than we do. You know, maybe it would go to them. I don't know, but their hands are useless, you know.
But their noses are awesome. I feel like after reading about echidnas in your book, I'm not going to be looking at the echidnas down in Tasmania that are all over the land that I'm the custodian of, ever the same.
I went to Tasmania for the first time about a year ago, and that was, and so I got off the plane, and then the First Nations mob met me there at the airport, and they took me, we didn't go fish and chips or to the uni or anything. They took me straight to the mountain, and so up we go, and they give me all that story. And the first thing I encountered was a Tasmanian echidna. And I don't know if you're aware, have you ever been up here mainland, seen the echidnas here? They're very different.
I didn't notice the difference of them, actually. Tell me about the difference.
Oh, well, they're furry ones you got.
Because it's colder?
I don't know. It's cold in Victoria, and they're not furry like that. But they're just very different. But they've, they're mutated in response to different story, different meaning making that the custodians have made there, in response to the pattern of that place. So you've got very different things going on there. Yeah, because they're different from the echidnas anywhere on the mainland. I was shocked. It was like I'm
going to have to pay more attention to the echidnas when the borders open up and I can get back down there. What that makes me think of is, so I studied a fair amount of science before pulling out of the traditional education system, and I guess Charles Darwin's theory of evolution and the story that was attached to that is something that I'm really curious about. Around that narrative of survival of the fittest, which interestingly is something that he never actually said. It was a tagline attached to his theory, and I can't help but wonder the different trajectory we would have ended up on if the narrative that was attached to that was that he went to the Galapagos Islands and actually the diversity of these different islands changed the genetic makeup of these finches, and would that allow us to connect more to our physical landscape and realise that actually has a unique impression on us and our evolution, as opposed to being survival of the fittest and the hierarchy and all of the crap that goes along with that?
Yeah, because we have agency. If you read Darwin, it's pretty spot on in a lot of places. We have agency, and when I say we, I mean groups of we. Not as individuals, but as groups. We have agency over the patterns of creation and evolution. So a lot of the theory now around co-evolutionary fitness surfaces, that's worth a look at, because complexity science is coming more into it. So you got basins of attraction. Hang on a minute. Hey, book Wayne. Up. Basins of attraction, all these sorts of things. But co-evolutionary fitness surfaces, the equations that they're doing around that, and even the software models they're putting together around that is really interesting. It's sort of touching the edge of the actual patterns and the complexity that's there. But Darwin was pretty good. He just, in the end, he hobbled himself, because he went to your country where you are sitting there now. I shouldn't say your country, but where you are there. And he went there, and then he was stupid enough to say something along the lines of, inevitably, hey,
she's having a great time.
So he said, inevitably the advanced races will eclipse these inferior races of humans. Even though he was there really appreciating the complexity of the people, he still went and said that, and that was what everyone seized on. Seized on that. So the survival of the fittest came out of Charles Darwin's interaction with Australia. That was where that came from, and it came from one stupid comment in the middle of all of his genius, because it was genius, and so therefore, they named a city after him here, they named a university after him, but they like to do that. I went to James Cook University. Now I'm at Alfred Deakin, I'm at Deakin University now. And Alfred Deakin was like the godfather of the White Australia policy. He was the one, Edmund Barton, the first Prime Minister, he invented it, the idea, but it was Alfred Deakin who actually made it work. So it was Alfred Deakin who actually installed it and you know, it designed the entire thing. And his speeches, if you read them, are horrifying. So he was a eugenicist, you know, and the eugenics movement came out at that time, and they very much, you know, glorified Charles Darwin, but they basically banked on the fact that nobody would actually read his book. Yeah, so they just put that quote up there. You know, Australia's federation, it was built on eugenics. And, you know, most of the places in Australia are named after these freaks. But yeah, you actually reach out, and I wish I'd read more of him too, like before I wrote the book, you know, because, you know, I came up with that different model of time, that idea when I was looking at the first and second laws of thermodynamics. And I was coming up with a different physics of time from an Aboriginal perspective. And I thought I was being really clever. And then a couple of months after the book was published, I found out that Charles Darwin had also been dabbling with physics and had come to the same conclusion. So I'm like, oh, great. You know, Charles Darwin is my brother.
Well, I like to think that we're potentially, you know, all brothers and sisters in some sense. And one thing that I've been really curious about of late is something that my dad actually asked me when I was very young. He used to ask me a lot of questions, and I'm not sure why he thought that I'd have the answer as a 9-year-old, but I guess he would have these epiphanies and he'd kind of check with me, and he was like, do you think that, you know, it's all a bit like bullshit that, you know, that they're saying that the human species came out of Africa and actually it came out of Australia, and that's why that we have this multicultural country now, because it's everybody just coming back home.
Yep.
And I'm really curious about that unfolding now, because, you know, we're talking about the White Australia policy, which is just like absolutely horrific, and I don't want to glaze over that or skip past that in any way. I think that we should absolutely acknowledge it, and it's part of our healing and recognition as a country. But I think that it's very curious, in fact, that we have ended up with probably the most multicultural country in the world, with the most ancient wisdom in the world. And so if you elevate out of it and just look at it from like an astral sense, we kind of have a lot of the ingredients here to co-create some real magic and come back to our essence. But there's this real kind of tension at the moment where we're kind of fighting each other over it, and nobody's belonging, and really, you know, our innate need as a human species is to belong and connect. Yeah.
Well, I think what we're doing is cycling through trauma. And we keep putting ourselves round and round through trauma and failing to make meaning around that. You know, Old Man Juma's, I mention it in the book. So Old Man Juma is, you know, the elder who provides all the symbols in the book. If you feel yourself transformed by it, it's not my words that are doing it. It's seeing his symbols, like, because they do change you, like at the molecular level. He's really excited, and all those symbols are from a star dreaming, which was law that was passed to him from women, like old women passed that law to him, you know, which is unusual, you know. So it's law that transcends gender and goes across a lot of boundaries. It's very interesting. But basically, you know, he believes right now we're at a time in history of when the 7 spirit families have returned to where they come from. And the 7 spirit families, you know, he sees these are the tribes of people who went out from Australia. So it's very much an out of Australia theory that he's coming to. There is a good book on that makes a good argument for it, the Into Africa theory, it's called. And it's worth a look, because there's a lot of crazy stuff out there around that theory. Like really stupid stuff, but that's probably the most rigorous scientifically one that I've seen. Western scientifically anyway, most rigorous one would be Juma. But yeah, so he sees those 7 spirit families. Sometimes he says 7 bloods. You know, that they're all represented back here again. And so it's a time of, he always sees history as this, it's not even really cyclic, which is a metaphor that we like to say a lot, but it's not really cycles. It's more like breathing, so he sees creation as constantly breathing out and breathing in, and so he sees this as a time, of massive change, but it's very exciting, because all the spirit families have come home, and that, when we all unite again, that things will, we'll get to enjoy a really nice long period of homeostasis, stability in the system. He doesn't use the word homeostasis. But
that just made my whole body relax hearing the word homeostasis. That maybe I guess we've danced around this a lot, is that the importance of language in our meaning making and sense making, and so maybe a word is something around balance, harmony, reunion.
Well, every system goes through periods of hysteresis and homeostasis, and we're kind of we're in hysteresis right now, but it's not the end of the world. There's no such thing as the end of the world. But that has come out of a tradition where religions were created instead of an experience of spirit and living spirit. They put together these dogmatic sort of things that were about social control, and it was about changing people's view of time. Because in order to control the present, whoever controls the present controls the past, and and then they can steer the future, as well. So it was about controlling that past and present and future, and placing it on that straight line. And so if you gave people this idea that they weren't just moving around and around and around in cycles of constant renewal within systems, dynamic systems, if you gave people that idea that they if they accepted misery now and behaved and did what they were told, that there is some reward at the end, they'll get to spend eternity in paradise or whatever.
I remember the first time I realized that was complete crap going through the Catholic education system. As I went on my first flight, and I was going to Darwin. We went and lived in Darwin for a year as a 9-year-old, and I got up the top of those clouds, and there was no people in white cloaks, and there was no harps, and I was so pissed off. I was like, there's no heaven up here.
Sky camp is supposed to be here. It's just really funny to me. And in order to make religion work as it was very hard to control people just with violence. Like you have to have, violence every now and then to remind people that you can do that. But it's very expensive and very debilitating for an empire to have to continually be controlling every single person with violence. So you have to make them into self-policing vassals, and religion is good for that. So if you take the natural introspection of being a spiritual being, there's a fair bit of introspection involved with that. So if you take that process, which we're evolutionarily we're designed to do that, if you take that and you turn that into people policing themselves, looking for the sin, purging the sin all the time, identifying the sin, and in your case with the Catholicism, to be confessing the sin to an authority, and then to be accepting and then self-imposing the punishment without anybody watching. But you're definitely going to go and do that. You're going to say those Hail Marys. It was the entire neoliberal model, and us now as neoliberal subjects, who enforces our KPIs at work? And now particularly working from home, we can see it. Who's enforcing it? We're expected to be our own managers. While our managers sit on their butts in an office somewhere watching YouTube videos, we're here policing our work behaviors and doing all the make work and the unnecessary stuff to keep ourselves busy, all day, and to keep ourselves separate from our children and from, everything else, from our environment, and from, noticing anything that's actually going on. And the history of this, the way it evolved, is just terrifying, and the way it's gone into, especially with this tech space. So I mean, originally, when in the Cold War, they sent a lot of the top intellectuals from Russia and the United States, came together for a series of talks and summits to try and resolve the arms race problem, because people were a bit worried about, nuclear winter and stuff like that. They didn't talk for long about the nuclear problem. In the end, that they were going into these weird, because the Russian intellectuals had come out of that, a sort of a sect that came out of that weird Gnostic Russian Orthodox religion. And there was a really trendy thing. They were called cosmists.
It does sound trendy, doesn't it?
Yeah, but all those people in the East and the West, they were all following that Madame Blavatsky, the one who, and everybody read her. So Gandhi and Hitler were both of their ideologies were informed by Blavatsky, and it was basically science fiction. She said she was channeling all the spirits to write this stuff. And so anti-Semitism in its current brand came out of her work, because she, the idea of the Aryan race was in her work, and Gandhi liked that, because the Aryans came from India originally, apparently, according to her. So there was all this weird stuff that came out of that. And the cosmists, they were all about, becoming perfect beings. So the current ideas of transhumanism and, uploading our consciousness to the web, the stuff that's driving all the weird, autistic, misogynistic pricks in Silicon Valley, who are currently basically turning us into, data mining slaves to feed their AIs. All of that stuff is coming out of those weird talks that happened between the Russian cosmists and the US eugenicists back in the day. It's the weirdest thing, but it all follows that religion pattern of, making us all self-policing. So, we go onto these social media sites and, we just look for the sin in each other. We confess our sins, like, everyone's like, self-owning about, that time when they had a racist thought 3 years ago or something, confessing that online, and how they're really, they're really owning their white privilege, but then policing other people, like, doing all this purity testing, and this has ruined it. Like, it's designed to destroy our resistance movements and our activists. It's designed to fragment us, so that, and I've seen, especially a lot of the green movements and organizations that I've been involved with over time, I've seen them destroyed, torn apart, atomized, hard fork, boom, around things. So, the trans thing, so just basically, if you've got women or feminists in your group who are like, no, man, a woman is a woman. I don't like males coming into that space. And then it's like, transphobe. And then, everyone's smashing each other. And there's probably, just from me mentioning it, people would be like, alarm going off, he's had an impure thought, and there's these just weird inquisitions going on of just mobs just in chaos going round and round and like crucifying each other. It's incredible at the moment, but the massive social control that's available, to the powerful when we become fragmented like that. Any activist groups, they've all imploded, under that culture, because they haven't been able to step out of that linear view of time imposed by religion. And they might think they're atheists, but they're not. They're all religious fanatics, because they're all seeking purity. Whether it's with recycling, without like asking yourself, how much toxic wastes produced through the recycling process? How much energy is used in the recycling process? Well, what's discarded? What's the toxic waste that comes out of that? How much water is used to recycle a can or to make a park bench out of 10,000 shopping bags? It's like, that's not what it's for. Recycling is not about sustainability. It's a ritual that people do to signal their virtue and their purity to others, and then to police other people. Hey, that goes in the recycling bin.
I couldn't agree more. I think that's where and I say this as someone that comes out of I spent my over 10 years in my last career heavily indoctrinated in the sustainability field. And I think that, we've spent a lot of time telling people how bad they are. We're consuming more than the earth can regenerate. We're not recycling enough. We're using too much energy. And, we're focusing on that kind of that energy of guilt and shame. And until we can elevate out of that guilt and shame and just be curious and peaceful, and, all of these other things that feel more expansive as opposed to contracting, I don't think we'll be able to design ourselves out of this mess. And I also don't think that, with the whole climate change issue that we're facing, is that, even if we could design ourselves out of that until we heal our individual and collective trauma, specifically here in Australia, because of, we're only just sort of starting to have the curtains pulled back. I like that you've got the curtains pulled back behind you to be aware of this stuff. Like I'm 33, and a lot of this wasn't even taught when I was at school. I had to go through my own learning journey. Like Jesus was. It's very curious. I actually did feel like I would die at 33 or be reborn. Not because I'm Jesus, but it was just this really intense feeling that I had. And in a lot of ways, I think I have died and been reborn a lot this year. In various ways. But I don't know, time isn't even real, and it is real all at the same time, which we've kind of touched upon. But I think that there'd be a lot of people listening here. We've gone into a lot of topics, and a lot of people kind of wondering how. So how do we individually heal? How do we acknowledge the traditional custodians? How do we sense make? How do we meaning make? And I know that you probably could. That's a huge question, and I don't expect you to articulate it in a paragraph. But I'd love if you could maybe ground that in ritual and kinship, and perhaps touch on the songlines in Australia, and if any of those things could be part of the key to unlocking some of this stuff.
Well, it's difficult, because in order to live that and be that and become what you need to become and what we need to become, to do that yourself through your self-work will isolate you from everyone else. Because everybody is insane right now, completely insane. And for you to heal yourself and actually get out of those cycles of trauma and to start behaving in the way that you need to behave would simply isolate you and do more damage. I think a lot of it needs to be around, like you say, the curiosity is important, so challenging the grand narratives, but trying not to make that into dogma, so, it was so important and such a lightning rod, awesome piece of history to challenge a lot of the thinking, the imperialist and colonial and, essentially Romanized ideas around gender, for that to be challenged. There was some great scholarship and there was some really good transformations and healing that came out of that. But then it became dogma. And once something becomes dogma, it becomes institutionalized, and the system loves that. It's, the system isn't sexist and it isn't racist or anything else. It will absorb any idea and turn it towards its own ends. It'll twist it into its own pattern. So, it's really difficult. because if you heal yourself individually, then you're isolating and socially fragmenting, and you're serving the system. If you heal yourself as a group, then your core ideas, no matter how true and healing and right they are, they will be co-opted by the system, and they will be turned into dogma, and they will end up serving the system. That was the purpose of the chapter in my book that's called Forever Limited.
I love that chapter so much, actually. I've got it. I did lots of
that was my book. That was the title of the book.
Ah.
Yeah. But it was just it's too complicated an idea. It's not something that, so like I said, it was a bit of marketing genius, what they actually chose for the title. Another option for the title was Us Too. And I think that's a good way to be doing it, to be focusing on not your inner work, but focusing on making your kinship pairs in the world, but not just with other humans, also with non-humans, to be making kin in those ways, become a part of as many pairs as you can, form as many pairs as you can, but then start to make the links happen between those. So just network, but do it at all those levels. Do it at the individual level, at the pair level, us two, you and me, like we're doing now. But then in your exclusive groups, so gendered or, just hijab wearing or, whatever your thing is, your exclusive groups, and be a part of a few exclusive groups, but then also seek to become part of a bigger system, a bigger network. But then you've got to try and move that network to be in communication and exchange with other big networks. You know what I mean? Mm-hmm. So you're just basically going from the micro to the macro and networking and taking the good and bad and going, okay, so, all right, all right, so I don't agree with some of these aspects of liberal feminism, or this might be what you're thinking, like, or I don't like these aspects of Nazism, and why is it that, like, that the people who take guns to a protest, who march with their guns and tiki torches, that nobody brings out their guns for the important things, like, climate change. That's something to bring your guns out for, not stop them from taking down this racist statue. Oh, we're going to bring our guns out. It's like the only people who are willing to actually put their bodies on the line or to do anything, like that, to use force, are the people who are doing it in the service of evil things and small things that don't really matter. You know what I mean? Like, so you're starting to think about all these things, and you're starting to go, well, what can I take from those people? I might not agree with the flat earth theory. This is an example from my book. I don't agree with the flat earth theory, but I love flat earthers. I could talk to them all day because they've got some good stuff. For a start, their networking skills are amazing. Their networking skills are amazing. Like, if you want to learn about networking, talk to a flat earther. They're absolutely insane, but they've got some good stuff.
I just met a flat earther the other day, actually, and she admitted that she became a flat earther after being in quarantine, and so she was given all of this flat earth, content to go through during quarantine, and she was so excited, and that excitement just made me really, really curious. So I am looking forward to having a big, curious, non-judgmental chat with my new flat earther friend.
I know they're really good at maintaining enthusiasm. It's like, oh, I'd like to know how to do that. I just feel exhausted most of the time, and they're never exhausted. It's like, wow, them and born again Christians, they've got more energy than anybody. So let's ask them what they're doing to get that, and it might mean that you need to deny some fundamental aspect of reality in order to go forward on something, and that's interesting. It's not to be condemned. It's just interesting. Like, just connect with everybody. You know, there was, Timothy Leary, the LSD dude in the United States.
That was testing LSD on like actual people?
Yeah.
Students?
It's hard to understand the history of where we are in terms of technology or anything without knowing about that dude and the people who came out of his movements. So basically the people who invented the internet, who built the internet into what we know it now, a lot of those were disciples of him or were influenced by that, because they were like, cyberspace was created out of trippers, people who were tripping balls initially on plant teachers that they'd stolen from indigenous indigenous rituals, but without any of the law or the practice or the understandings. They were just ingesting the substances like peyote, different kinds of cactuses and
ayahuasca, everything.
Yeah, ayahuasca, all that sort of stuff. They were doing it outside of, a cultural or social framework or a framework of law or land or anything else. So they were just floating in the spirit world, and they saw it and they just went, wow. And then they recreated it online. They recreated that. So the windows that we have, that they came out of trips. So then they went into the synthetics with the LSD and all that sort of thing. So Timothy Leary and all of his acolytes, they built the internet as we know it, and, if you see the intersections with that and the weird transhumanist religions and simulation theory, everything else that's come out that's driving us towards this insane apocalypse that really doesn't need to happen. You really need, it's really worth looking into that, all of that stuff. We really don't need this apocalypse. And you also need to know, just let yourself off the hook individually. It's not your fault. Even our human communities, we're not the ones. We believe that we're chimpanzees in clothes, and that it's in our nature to destroy the world and our environment. And there's nothing we can do about that. We're inherently evil. We have this stain of original sin, but we can't help ourselves. We're just naturally inclined to wreck our environment. And it's absolute bullshit. 90% of the waste, the toxic waste in the world, is not produced by our human communities. It's produced by the industries that enslave us and control us. 90% of the water use. How they keep telling us to take shorter showers? We could all do that, but we only use 10% of the water. The rest of it's used by these insane industries, including the recycling industry, by the way, which is incredibly water intensive. It's not us that's using all the water. Our selfish bathing is not using all the fresh water. Our selfish eating is not we're not causing intensive agriculture. It's an inefficient practice that's been established by people, like, quite deliberately, to lose money in significant parts of that industry and to burn unnecessary energy to justify tapping more oil than we actually need, etc. It's to facilitate these insane, massive supply chains. They don't care that it costs like $1 million to get an apple to you, because you've got to ship the labor in from one place, from one country, to pick the apples in another country. And then you've got to ship those apples to another country to get them polished, and then ship them to another country to package them, and then ship them back somewhere else for people to eat them. It costs so much money for you to eat one apple. They've spent so much money, more than what you're paying for it. And they're getting subsidized at every stage of this insane supply chain. They're getting subsidized through governments, all the worst polluting and the most inefficient. They're getting subsidized to produce those. And then they can't have surpluses of that. They can't have too much, because in order to have economic growth, there needs to be more demand than supply. And the demand needs to keep increasing if your economy needs to keep growing. So there needs to be more people missing out. Mm-hmm. There's more than enough apples for everybody. So they have to destroy like billions of tons. You know, we talk about, the amount that we waste, the amount of food you throw away every day is enough to feed everybody, every hungry person on the planet. And we're supposed to feel guilty about that while they're burning billions of tons of food every day. You know, read The Grapes of Wrath. Have another look at that. Do you remember that and why that was called The Grapes of Wrath?
No.
It was the big, so it's during the Depression while people were starving to death. And they were dumping massive amounts of fresh fruit, veggies, and produce in these huge mountains to rot so that they could increase the demand. And so starving people were trying to get to that mountain of food, and they paid guards to stand around and shoot people who were trying to get to them. You know, all these things are engineered, tinkered, you know, in order to produce surpluses in some areas, deficits in other areas. You know, this insanely tinkered, complicated system, not complex, complicated, you know, and we're all just slaves in this system who are supposed to be self-policing. And those of us who are educated enough to see that there's, you know, imbalances and inequities and that they're structural, you know, we're redirected into like turning our thoughts inwards to find our own inner impurities. Like, how much food am I wasting? You know, I threw an apple core away and that could have fed a starving kid in Asia, or, you know, and I'm recycling. I'm using my recycling bin, you know. Oh no, you know, I put a can in the wrong bin and I feel terrible. You know, the middle classes, those of us who are lucky enough to you know, purchase merit, you know, through an education system in order that we could get paid more to police the masses and to police ourselves. You know, we kind of have a bit of an obligation, you know, historically over the last few centuries. We have, just over the last couple of centuries, you know, we have an obligation that we've accrued to actually find ways to organize and think and share information and basically hold the powerful accountable from time to time, just to try and swing things back into some kind of balance. But we don't do that. We're redirected and misdirected into this navel gazing, you know, that we keep doing. You know, so that's why I don't find guilt helpful. You know,
it's curious that you use the word obligation. I was asked this question by somebody in an interview earlier this week around, do you think that essentially climate activism is just for the privileged? And it really triggered the crap out of me, actually, because yes, in a way, you know, we are privileged. I'm definitely privileged to, you know, I don't really want to give myself the label of an activist, but I have been involved in various different forms of activism and finding my own meaning making and sense making in activism. But it is an obligation because, you know, there's enough things that I know now that I wouldn't actually be a worthy ancestor if I wasn't using my voice and I wasn't being curious about all of these things and finding some kind of courage to actually speak about it and question it. And I think that, you know, giving people back their like creating more self-authoring humans who have like these containers where they can explore this stuff and then kind of step out of those containers and send those signals to other people is exactly what we need. You know, don't even get me started on the media and the fact that, you know, there's, you know, a small amount of people controlling the narrative now. I'm very, very, very curious about how we become our own media and have these yarns and create dialogue of curiosity without judgment and help navigate through essentially the chaos theory that we find ourselves in today.
Yeah. Well, especially when we're all being manipulated to think and behave like machines, particularly in our online behaviors. Like originally the idea of AI was to make machines that think like humans, but the goal has changed, and now basically all these things, all these bots, algorithms, all the tech, everything else, the marketing, mass marketing, the psychological manipulation, it's gone the other way. It's to make us think like machines, you know. So the AI and the tech that's used for voice recognition in your device, that hasn't improved that much. What's changed is the way that you speak to it. You know, if you remember when you first started using those things, you'd talk to it and it wouldn't understand a damn thing you said. So then you had to change the way you were speaking to it and change again and again. We're not training the AI anymore. The AI is training us. And it's not about improving our lives. It's about extracting data from us because that AI needs data to graze on. Not many people, in the same way that people forgot about the Murray-Darling crisis because it rained. That's just a one-off rain event. But anyway, everyone's forgotten about that because there's water in the river again temporarily. The smoke cleared from the bushfires, people have forgotten about that. You know, in the same way that we've forgotten about all those things, not many people are switched on to the fact that the Internet of Things is being rolled out this year. Well, it's the most terrifying thing ever, the Internet of Things, just ecologically. What it means for the infrastructure and the extraction that's needed to facilitate that. But, you know, to facilitate a worldwide net that is recording every aspect of physical reality in real time and uploading it to massive servers, entire buildings, entire blocks that are being built, you know, with sand dredged from the ocean, with rare earth metals from all around the world. These tinkered systems that they become obsolescent within a couple of years and every component has to continually be replaced. So we've got 40 billion devices being created this year and installed. And that's projected to increase by 4,000% every year subsequent to that. The amount of devices with rare earth metals in it, and the rare earth metal refining process, it's the most toxic process known to humanity. It produces radioactive waste that has to be stored for thousands of years. And you know, what's your sustainable way of storing radioactive waste for even 100 years? You know, these industries don't have a plan for what happens in 100 years when those barrels in the concrete bunker rot through or corrode, and then the concrete itself gets cracks in it and becomes porous. They don't have a plan for 100 years, let alone 1,000 years, let alone the thousands of years that it will take to contain that. They don't give a shit at all. They really don't care. So us worrying about our, you know, trying to, I'm going to be the change that I want to see in the world. Don't be the change you want to see in the world. You know, who said that? Was that Gandhi?
I think it was Gandhi.
Yeah, Gandhi, who read Madame Blavatsky, you know, who invented anti-Semitism. You know, Madame Blavatsky, if you look into her, you're going to be like, man, I don't ever want to read anything from Gandhi again. So wow. Gandhi and Hitler were both devotees of Blavatsky. You know, don't be the change you want to see in the world. You're supposed to be a custodian of creation. So be that, you know, and you need to network, and together in your networks, in your pairs, your exclusive groups, your inclusive groups, and then your interactions with other systems, you know, making these systems interact together. It almost doesn't matter what the content of that is. It's you doing that. You need to be doing that, and, you know, basins of attraction will form. And then you can direct your energies towards those positive things. And you need to defend them. You need to defend them, not just from attacks, but from, if the system's trying to embrace your organization or your ideology, you need to say no. If they're offering you money, you need to say no. Because they'll take it and they'll just aikido that into their own thing. And business as usual will continue. You know, you need to resist the narcissism of navel gazing. to resist the narcissism of, and you don't argue with people. So the most important message in my book is very clearly stated. It's never wrestle a pig. You both get covered in shit and the pig likes it. Stop arguing with Trump supporters. Stop arguing with misogynists. Find some common ground. Find one thing that they're saying that makes sense, and then use a foundational knowledge protocol from Aboriginal culture, which is to, take something that someone says and build on it. Add to it. Stop debating people. Debate is bullshit. It's anti-productive. What you're looking for is a loose consensus around human values. And these are pretty much universal. It's not around issues that we're all going to argue about, who's allowed to get married to who and all that kind of bullshit. You got to get, to the actual human values and, start to build some kind of transitional culture, a culture of transition together that can move with this changing environment and retain some kind of memory of what happened, so they don't keep, every revolution, it just replicates the structures of tyranny that produced it. Every single revolution has done that. It's just a change in leadership and a change in language. We change our language, but we don't change the structures, the structural inequality.
Wow, that's so powerful, Tyson, and I love I love "Don't be the change, be a custodian." I think that's a really beautiful message to share with people, and an invitation as well. I think there's the healing that needs to occur between what I'm going to say is Australian and the traditional custodians, but it's also an invitation that we can all be custodians of our shared home. And I don't just mean Australia, I mean the whole world that is already this hidden wholeness of this planet that we live on, and we all have the same shared mum. And so remembering that we are here just to be just custodians and
come home. Come home.
Let's just come home.
Yeah. But when you get home, one of your cousins is going to be a troublemaker, and, and your brother's going to be a junkie, and he's going to be stealing your stuff, and it's going to be hard for a while, but you just come home anyway.
I look forward to everybody coming home to themselves, each other, and to our shared mum. And I think that there's a lot of solace in that. And I could definitely speak to you all day, but even though time isn't real, I don't want to take up more time than
my God.
I've had such a beautiful chat with you, Tyson. It's you're channeling and downloading so much wisdom, and I think you've just rewritten my entire DNA all over again. So
same. We did that together. It's been a really good yarn. I have learned a lot. A lot of the things I've said I haven't articulated before. Like, we did that together. Nice.
It was really beautiful sharing the space and the energy, and I feel like that there's definitely more yarns to come, and I look forward to the next one, hopefully being around a campfire.
Sweet. Let's do that.
In a cave near a waterfall, somewhere like that, would be really, really cool. But I absolutely appreciate you making so much time and space and getting curious around some pretty sticky and complex questions that definitely we don't have it all figured out, but it's really great to be able to share the content and try to make sense of some of this stuff with you.
Yep. Sweet. Yeah, let's do that. Let's make a campfire someday with reclaimed arsenic-laced timber and by a beautiful waterfall on a waterway that's just full of dead fish. We'll definitely do that.
That sounds amazing. And maybe
you got to laugh, don't you?
You've got to laugh. Maybe we can perform some kind of healing ceremony there, and say, sorry for killing all the fish. But hopefully we can get there before all of the fish do die.
Yeah.
And maybe we can find a branch that has given itself already over.
What we need to do is help. We need to build the story and the ritual and the knowledge, and that intentional custodial role, getting out of the trauma and getting into co-creating these co-evolutionary fitness surfaces, and help the fish to adjust to mercury levels, and to find new breeding grounds because we've dammed the rest of them or whatever, and go from there, because it's co-evolution from here to adapt to something that'll take at least 1,000 years to heal, even if we stopped all of this insanity today.
Yeah, there's so much solace in that. The place that I'm moving to in Tasmania actually has this Gaia walk, and you walk through from the Big Bang all the way through the other kind of great extinction events and the development of butterflies and whales and all of these things. And it's, when I kind of did it, my whole body was just like, we have done this before, and it's like there's a lot of pressure on this moment in time that we have to design ourselves out of it and stop it, but it's actually kind of bound to happen. But we do have a place in this co-evolution to pivot it in a slight way. It's like a big Titanic ship, just pivot in like one degree of change, and that will actually create a huge degree, in 1,000 years' time. And I think
there's a lot of toxicity to work our way through, and a lot of it's cultural too. So even naming the spirit of our world, Gaia, is coming from something so horrendous, So that was a Greco-Roman thing too. So if you look up the Roman marriage ceremony and their vows,
I already can feel I don't want to do it.
Okay, well, part of the vows was, the woman would say, "I am Gaia to your Gaius." So, the word Gaius, that name, and it's still there today. We call men guys. And then he'd say, "I am Gaius to your Gaia." And then he'd take her across the threshold. And of course, they'd have to display the bloodied sheet afterwards to the people who were waiting outside. And then he had legally power of life and death over her. He could crucify her. He could crucify his Gaia in his living room if he wanted to, without getting into any trouble. He could kick her out on the street and get a new 12-year-old wife whenever he wanted. So that's what Gaia means in this culture. Gaia is subservient to Gaius. And, if we need to, so even in our most spiritual, greenest, semi-religious philosophy is inherently misogynist. And so we need new cultures of transition, like I said, to transition through this Anthropocene. Anyway, my bubba's come back, and I need to get back to some sort of caring role and walk my talk.
Go and be a custodian of your beautiful children and your beautiful place. And thank you so much. No worries. Really appreciate the time and the love and the energy and the authenticity. And I'll send you a copy before I make anything live in case there's anything that you don't want in there. But thank you so much, Tyson. It's been a total pleasure. I kind of want to do this to you, but I don't want to pray at you. So thank you so much.
It's funny. Well, we could say namaste, or
we can namaste.
But or we could just do the Aboriginal equivalent, which is just, how you going?
How you going? I actually have my clap sticks next to me, so I could clap out. I'll clap us out. Oh my goodness.
Well, I don't know this.
Are we going to clap each other out?
I don't know. Let's see. What do you want to do, honey? Come here, baby. Yeah.
Hello. What have you got?
You got this Bondi. Lexi's a clapstick there. Hey.
Hello, friend. I look forward to meeting you in person.
All right, no worries. See you later.
Take care, legends. Lots of love.
We're here for absorbing.
Wow, that conversation covered so many areas, but I think my favorite part was don't be the change, be a custodian, and what a beautiful invitation as we navigate where to from this moment. if you haven't already, please do grab a copy of Sand Talk. It's an incredible read. I've been carrying it around with me and going over chapters throughout my days. This podcast was made possible by Starling, which means to fly in formation, and they create unbeatable teams to tackle purpose-driven projects. A huge thank you to Paul Archer for producing this content, and another massive thank you to Felipe Baldomir for the beautiful tunes.